My name is Minko Gechev. I'm working on Angular at Google, and today I want to give you a few updates about what's coming in Angular version 8. So version 8 is coming soon. It was supposed to come out last week. Maybe we're going to release it tomorrow. We want to make sure, of course, everything works well together, so we're taking our time in verifying that. Because on conferences, very often I'm getting questions about our release schedule, I wanted to start with this. So I want to describe in details what is our release schedule so that I can probably comfort you a little bit about it. We have 2 major releases a year. That's it. So that's it. We have 1 release in the spring and 1 in the fall. And by doing this, we're first following semantic versioning. So across major releases, we can potentially have some backwards incompatible changes. We are trying to make it as predictable as possible so that you can organize your migration. For example, for half a day, you may want to dedicate 1 person to migrate your application to the latest version once we release it. And we also open some space for innovation, because some of the ideas that we implement, we don't find great adoption for them, for example, or we want to evolve them further. So we want to open the door for some changes like deprecations so that we can move the framework forward and help it evolve. But still, this means that we can potentially have some breaking changes, right? So they're quite scary. And I think we're recently doing a good job with this. So KOM, they published a story of their migration strategy over the past couple of Angular versions. Migrating from Angular version 2 to 4, it took them over a month, which was pretty bad, so we did a bad job there. From 4 to 5, it took them about 2 weeks. And from 6 to 7, it took them less than a day. They think that this is going to be the case for their migration to version 7 to 8 as well. Part of this is, of course, because their team already has very good expertise in doing these migrations. But also we're working on tooling to make this possible. So introduced ng update, which migrates your application across Angular versions automatically. We migrate not only your package JSON dependencies, but we also try to migrate your source code when we find that you're using deprecated APIs or something that we're planning to change in the future. For example, in Angular version 7, we were using string syntax for low children, and because we want to take advantage of modern standards, we decided to move this to dynamic imports. Here, we're going to perform automated migration of your applications to use dynamic imports instead of load children, and the CLI should do that automatically for you. It is going to analyze your application. It is going to find out all the different places where you have used load children. It is going to switch the string syntax to dynamic import, promise resolution, and it's going to pick the right module depending on the value that you have set after the hash. Some people are even try to automate this even further. So ColdStar, they introduced this as part of their CI. Once they find out that their CI finds out that there is a new version of Angular, it is going to try to automatically migrate their application and open a pull request for them so that the engineers can just approve this pull request and already take advantage of the newest version of the framework. And if on some reason these don't work for you, we're trying to maintain update.angular.io, where between different versions, we're providing all the things, like all the steps that you can follow in order to align with the latest version of the framework. Now, I want to spend some time talking about the community, because I've been part of the Angular community for the past, I think, over 6 years now. So in 2018, we noticed growth about over 50%. So there are about 1.5 million developers visiting Angular IO on a monthly basis. And one of the questions that I get most frequently after, of course, are you going to break my app? So this is the second one, is how can I contribute? So I've been contributing. I'm going to share my story in a little bit. But a few ways which I see that they work pretty well for most people are like organizing a meetup, like helping with the docs, writing a blog post. Like these things go on. For example, you can mentor someone and help them to get started with the framework, or introduce a bug fix, or any of these actually work. So this was my first contribution. I spent 2 hours opening this pull request in 2013. Back then, AngularJS was the framework that we were all using. And I found out that there is a missing brace in one of the documentation examples. And I spent 2 hours because, well, that's Google. Like, Google don't make mistake, right? So I thought that it's a mistake in me that I see this missing brace. It turns out that there was one, so I wrote this example. The example from the documentation, I run it, and I found that my change actually makes some sense. That was a change. Yeah, 2 hours. So I've been contributing to Angular since then more actively. After that, started opening some feature requests, like very small features, which were already on the roadmap. But it was hard to contribute with something bigger. And well, it's really hard because once we implement a new feature, we want to make sure that everything works well together. And we want to make sure that we're not going to break the 1,000 applications that are using Angular internally at Google that we're maintaining. So in order to help folks who are already familiar with the community and already contributing on a regular basis to ship features with bigger impact, we created the Angular Collaborators program. So with the Angular Collaborators program, we have a couple of folks who are very active in the community, and they want to keep contributing on features with bigger range. And in order to give you an even better idea of what the Collaborators program is all about, I'm going to share the feature that we introduced together with Manfred Ster, which is probably one of the key features in version 8, differential loading. So Manfred developed a third-party extension called ngx build modern, which takes your Angular application, it produces 2 builds, one for old browsers and one for new browsers. It transforms your index.html file so that it can produce, help the browser to consume the right bundle depending on the supported feature set, and that's it. And since this completely aligns with our roadmap, we invited Manfred to collaborate on our design document on differential loading, which includes basically a bunch of text where we're trying to predict what is going to be the impact of the feature and plan its implementation. After that, we went through implementation phase where, together with Manfred, we worked on a couple of pull requests. We implemented this feature, and it is going to be enabled by default in all Angular CLI projects. So as I mentioned, with differential loading, we want to build two times your application. One for older browsers, which do not support ES 2015, and one for newer browsers, which don't need a bunch of the polyfills that older browsers do need. This is going to lead to faster applications because, well, the modern syntax no longer needs to be down levels to legacy one. So you can write modern syntax, your bundles are going to be easier to eventually debug, and smaller. The modern syntax allows you to be more expressive and have more bundles. According to some very early measurements that we did, we have about 65 kilobytes drop in polyfills and 2 to 10% drop in bundle sizes, still depending on the expressiveness of the syntax that you're using. And differential loading, it's pretty simple anyway, so I'm going to give you an overview of how this works. The browser is going to receive an index.html file. It is going to pick the right bundle to load, depending on the feature set that it supports, and right after that, download this bundle and respectively bootstrap your application. This is how the index.html file is going to look like. We have the 2 script tags, one with type module, and one with attribute no module. This is for older browsers. We picked differential loading instead of differential serving or any other more like fancy mechanism because it is very simple in terms of deployment. This is just a static application, and the browser makes the decision which bundle to use to bootstrap your application. So you can just put this app on any CDN, and it's all going to work. You don't need any complicated serving infrastructure. Also, there is work in terms of support of lazy loading on finer level of granularity. So we will be able to download ES5 bundle, ES 2015, 16, and so on and so forth. So we can produce some bounded number of builds of your app in order to make sure that each user is getting the latest browser, the latest version they support. We shipped a couple of more, we're going to ship actually a couple of more features in version 8. We're going to ship builders, ng-deploy, and a few others. For example, web workers. Vasim is later going to talk about web workers and how you can take advantage of them. Let's stop on builders and deployment for now. From a lot of people, we have heard the feature request that they want to extend the Angular CLI. They want something like ng eject, but in the same time, they don't want to maintain their Webpack configuration. And this definitely makes sense. So we introduced this table API, which allows you to implement new comments in the Angular CLI or overwrite existing ones. A lot of folks are not too happy, for example, with Karma. They prefer the user experience of Jest or Cypress instead of Protractor. So there is already community effort in overriding this command. So there are some extensions which can allow you to they allow you to add them to your Angular CLI project and override the specific commands for you. I mentioned also that with this builders API, we're able to create new commands. And well, one of our biggest motivations for creating a new command was the fact that a lot of folks are not using content compression, for example, when they're deploying their application, which is a very low-hanging fruit that you should definitely take advantage of. You should gzip your static assets. Also, CDN. You should definitely provide your application from the closest geological source to the users, and so on and so forth. That was our motivation for introducing deployment command that you can use in the Angular CLI. This is an example specific to Firebase, but we're already working with different cloud vendors which are going to provide similar functionality. With ng-add and the specific package, we're going to install the packages for the corresponding cloud provider. After that, we're going to connect you to your account so that you can select a project. From there, we're going to create a few configuration files for you. And once you run ng-run, the name of your application, :deploy, we're going to start the production build of your app. And this production build is going to follow best practices. So we're going to build your application ahead of time. After that, we're going to, of course, tree shake it. We're going to rename some symbols. So we're going to perform minification, dead code elimination, and all these optimization techniques. Once we are done and we have the directory with static assets, we're going to delegate the execution to the corresponding cloud provider, which is going to upload your assets, and you're going to get a link where you can preview your app. So this is happening directly from the CLI. This was an example with GCP and Firebase, but as I mentioned, we're working very closely with Microsoft. We're working in very early stage with AWS, Netlify, and Zeit. So on top of these features that we're going to ship sometime this week, we also have some features that are work in progress. About a year ago, we started an initiative called Build Like Google with Bazel. So how many of you are actually familiar with Bazel? OK, so just for those of you who are not, Bazel is a build tool that we're using inside of Google for the past about 12 years. It builds our entire monorepo, not only Angular, but also some C++ projects, some Go projects. It builds stuff like Gmail, Photos, Google Search, and many others. With Bazel, we want to make sure that the build is incremental. So across your builds, you're not going to rebuild things that are already that have not changed yet. And this cache for the incrementality, you can share it across your development team, even by moving it into the cloud or moving it just into an Nginx server. It has full stack support, so you'll be able to build your backend and your front end with it, and it scales in the cloud. So it is going to compile your application in parallel in many different processes in each core of your CPU. And if you don't have enough cores, which probably you don't have hundreds of cores, it can run your build in the cloud and speed it up there. A few of the Bazel users now are, of course, Google for over 12 years. We have Lucidchart, who are already building their application with Bazel. We have DigiOcean and many others. These are just a couple of examples who have already adopted Bazel for their Angular use case. In the Angular repo, we noticed some improvements in build time for our continuous integration for Circle CI. So previously, before Bazel, it was taking about 1 hour to build all the packages from our monorepo. This was quite slow, and it didn't allow us to move as fast as we wanted to. With Bazel and with remote build execution, our build dropped to about 7.5 minutes. I'm very happy to share that Bazel is in an opt-in preview, is going to be in an opt-in preview this week. And you'll be able to create new projects with Bazel by installing the Bazel schematics and builders. And right after that, running the application, like bootstrapping a new application with the Bazel schematics, so that we can update the current builder that we have and replace it with Bazel. Pretty much the same way that I told you that other folks are replacing the testing command. And well, another effort that we're working on is the Ivy renderer/compiler. How many of you are familiar with Ivy? OK. So yeah, it is not going to be part of version 8 officially. But well, it aims to support backwards compatible rendering, of course, much simpler debugging, faster testing, and many others. So we want to test it across all the projects which are using Angular in Google to make sure that it works properly. We don't want to break everyone with it. And there are tens of thousands of tests which are there indirectly, which are transitively depending on Angular. And we have about 97% of them are passing. This includes screenshot tests, unit tests, different integration tests. So these are tens of thousands of tests which are now passing. We're hoping that we will turn this number to 100 in the next couple of weeks. We noticed that Ivy already helps us to have faster tests. For example, the test time for material dropped with 8%, and also it has about 91% lower memory usage. Some of the work pending is we want to make sure that your applications are really smaller with Ivy, that the compilation is faster, and we want to make sure that the type checking is already better than Vue Engine. We want to make it even better. So Ivy is in an opt-in preview as well. And you can create a new app with Ivy by using ng-new, the name of your application, after that -- enable Ivy. And of course, if you find something that does not work for you, just feel free to open an issue, and we're going to look at it. So the recap for today, what I'm hoping that I was able to communicate with you is that we are really careful with our release schedule. We have opened this door to move forwards, to innovate with Angular, and eventually deprecate some APIs if strictly necessary. But we want to make sure that it is in a very predictable way. We are hoping for this evergreen Angular, where just by using the CLI, you'll be able to always take advantage of the latest features that we provide. That will be able to automatically switch to the latest, like smaller and faster Angular. We have this collaborator program, which we hope to enable more people to get involved if they're interested. And the biggest features that we're shipping in version 8 sometime this week are differential loading, the builders API, web worker support, and many others. And make sure that you give a try to Bazel and Ivy in the CLI and give us your feedback. Yeah, thank you very much for your attention.